Welcome once again to Navigate with Tim Austin, a podcast created to help take some of the guesswork out of transition. I am Tim Austin, the host of this show, as well as head coach at Encompass Life Coaching. And I am thrilled to introduce my guest for this episode of Navigate. You will find her inspiring, insightful, and resourceful. And in the short time I've known Heidi, I've come to appreciate her and admire the work she does. And she is also an amazing networker and truly knows how to bring people together for thoughtful work and conversations. So you're in for a real treat today. Heidi is a leadership coach and trainer from Wisconsin, where she tells me that you can mow your lawn and shovel snow all in the same day. She's created and owned a handful of businesses, started a few ministries, and burned many things in the oven. She has a BA in communications, is certified as a leader-to-leader coach facilitator, strengths champion, and an ACC certified leadership and executive coach through the International Coaching Federation. She lives in Wisconsin with her husband and their house full of 7 kids, ages 3 to 18. She's been a Midwest redhead all her life, has enjoyed serving in short-term overseas missions, and frequently dreams of moving closer to the equator. So thanks for listening, and let's have a chat with my guest, Heidi Lewerenz. All right, Heidi, it is so good to have you on Navigate with me today for this conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, we sit in another space together on the Real Life Process network of facilitators and coaches and consultants out there, and I've been able to hear a little bit of your story. You've been able to hear a little bit of mine, bits and pieces through that time. But I'm really excited just to have this one-on-one today, and I want to just start out by hearing a little bit. I'd love my listeners to hear a little more about yourself and your story. Who is Heidi Lewerenz? And unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, sure. Thanks, Tim. So who is Heidi Lewerenz? Well, I am first and foremost, a child of the King. So I just try to really root my identity in who I am in Christ. And it's a daily walk. But I have many roles, like probably many of you and, many of the listeners. And I know you do too, Tim. I'm a mom. I have 7 children. My husband and I have been married for a little over 20 years, and we live in Wisconsin. And so I have I still have 6 kids at home. 1 is off to college. So that's a big part of what I do, is discipling them and growing them up. I also work part-time professionally as a coach and trainer, this passion for leadership and helping ambitious women and men, but then that entrepreneur space, integrate their lives, business and family at the same time.
At one point I heard you say 7 kids, but you have 6 at home. So one's off to what, college or something, or?
Yes. Well, he's back home now. So for 6 months, because he's doing an internship in town. So we have this another, transition. So we said goodbye. Yes. We launched him. He had a great year. And now he just came back a few days ago. And he's settled, it's just different. It's great to have him home, but he's had a whole year of freedom.
Always curious how people get to where they are professionally, and all the twists and turns around that, all the navigating of transitions around that. But what have been some moments of inspiration and or seasons of preparation that led you into this space?
I love that you call them seasons of preparation. Versus deserts or trials or intensity. Okay. Hard places. So I have been leading teams all of my life and have kind of been in that entrepreneur space. When we decided to have a family, I chose to become an entrepreneur and freelance graphic design and web design. And then for a few years, my husband and I had a company together that was a web development and graphic design company. And all the while we were having babies, and we had a move in there and transitioning from, infancy all the way through toddler into grade school years. And I had a crash. I would say that was a season of preparation, an adrenal crash. My body just shut down. Because as you know, Tim, right? Like if we don't pick up on the cues in our minds and we don't pick up on the cues in our spirits and listen to the Holy Spirit, or even in our emotions, like our our bodies start talking. And so mine started screaming at me and I had to really pull back. So I left the business and had a couple of years of focusing on getting healthy and really just pouring into the family. We had 6 kids at the time. And then it was just a few years ago, actually, that God led me back into something professional. And it was through John Ramstead's podcast, actually. I don't know if you've met him before, Tim.
I have not.
Yeah, I know someone mentioned him in the group this morning on another call that we were in. And I was really struggling with the transition of going from a mom of 6 to a mom of 7. And that might sound funny, but I mean, it'd been like 3 years since we'd had a child. And I don't know, 7 just felt harder and bigger and I don't know, crazier. Like I knew other people who had.
Yeah. To me, you know, the 3rd felt harder, crazier, and, you know, crazy. And here you're going from 6 to 7. I can't imagine.
Well, I think, you know, it is all relative, but it was just really a defining time. And I was researching like, you know, families with 7 kids and moms who had businesses with 7 kids and trying to just figure out how to get a handle on my life. That transition was just a really hard transition for me. And so I started taking some classes at Professional Christian Coaching Institute because there was part of me that just needed to be alive with learning and being in that professional world, even though so much of my responsibility was dedicated to children, you know, and raising them. And that just snowballed. I ended up taking more and more classes. I got certified through the ICF. And then I launched my coaching practice just before COVID hit America.
Okay.
So, so that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. So certainly some seasons of preparation. Like you said, I intentionally phrased that way because those seasons of preparation can be really great and inspirational and fun and exciting. And then others can be super, super challenging and hard. And like you said, maybe feel like a desert. Mm-hmm. But what was the particular inspiration when you were first kind of introduced to the world of coaching and the potential that you saw in that for a shift in terms of your professional role, right? Because you, up to that point, you had worked with teams and you had done, you had mentioned web design and some other areas that you were working in. So this was a big shift for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a big shift. And I think part of that was birthed out of, I had been a part of a leadership cohort, a group coaching cohort that was sort of tangential to my entrepreneurial endeavors, you know, and working with my husband. And so for 10 years, I was in this leadership group. And also during that time, I think maybe this was part of the crystallizing of this idea. We had started or been part of a group starting a ministry at our church around marriage and serving premarital couples. And there was just a lot of difficulty with equipping and working as a team. And so I was finding myself pulling these different resources from the cohort that I'd been in. And then, I don't know, the Lord brought other people in my life, leaders of leaders who were struggling with some of the same things. And I just thought, you know what? I am passionate about helping leaders of leaders manage some of the challenges, you know, around teamwork, around personalities, around communication. And I had all these tools in my toolbox because God had, you know, put me in this place with this cohort. Yeah. So it was really the leadership coaching that I'd heard of. And I thought, you know, I'm drawn to that. Life coaching. Yeah. I feel like what I do now is really a combination of life and business coaching, which is maybe the leadership space, but it's like that intentional space of helping leaders, you know, carry their vision, listen to the Holy Spirit, and just walk, equipping them to help teams have less conflict, you know, just so they can actually do the work they're called to do. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is a come alongside role as a guide, as a partner, as a resource. And I love that space too. And I'm always curious on how, you know, so many of us who are in the coaching space, fell in love with coaching because we signed up for it in the first place. We got coached, or we were introduced, like you were, into a cohort or something where there were rubbed shoulders with other coaches and heard and learned about what they did. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about, the seasons of life. And you've got marriage, family, career shifts. All of these play a role in how we leverage opportunities in transition seasons. So let's talk about transition and some of the resets and the reboots that go along with these, particularly as it pertains to seasons of life and the demands placed upon us. And yet, while the demands are placed upon us, we still have this desire to pursue a work that is meaningful and purposeful. And so what were some of those resets and reboots for you?
Yeah, that's a really great way to look at it. I think with every transition, there's a reset. Like you can't not accept a change and walk through it and not have a reset happen, And I feel like for me, they always have ripple effects too, right? So if you have a transition in one area of your life, it ripples into the others. They're just not isolated.
Right.
So really, for me, it was adding the babies. I mean, every 2 years we added a child. And so it upset the family rhythm. It upset the marriage rhythm. It upset the career rhythm. I mean, it blessed those rhythms too in other ways. But there was always a need to reset. We kind of had to survive the initial season. And then we kind of would try to catch our breath and regroup.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So really it was in the area of, like you said, every 2 or 3 years, a new kid comes along and you're doing a reset or a reboot. But let's go pre-marriage, pre-family. Yeah. So, how did in the environment that you lived in, that you were raised in, affect or influence the way you approach transition? Because I know you have a unique background in terms of you lived in a lot of places, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, thanks. I did. I mean, not very interesting places. I mean, they were all just in the state of Wisconsin, a lot of small towns. Okay. But not like, global traveler like you, Tim. Mm-hmm. But we had, my dad worked, he's a forester by training. And so he worked with the paper industry. And I don't know if you know, but it's a pretty volatile industry. So lots of mergers and acquisitions. And so his job shifted a lot. And so we moved like every 3 to 5 years. And sometimes we just moved, far enough to change schools, to change churches. Some of those things. And so at the time when I was, all the moves, none of the moves really affected me in a negative way until high school, because by then I had friends and I was more aware, I think, of what was changing. But when I look back, it really created this resiliency in me, and it created a view of transition, like a really healthy view, like there is a beginning and an end. Things don't always stay as hard as they are right when the change comes. And then it also gave me like an excitement, I guess, or it created kind of an appetite for change. Yeah.
Okay. So it was a positive thing for the most part, these transitions growing up. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious. A lot of times, especially in the space that I work in terms of as I come alongside cross-cultural workers, that expats living, not in their passport country, they're living in other countries, they're maybe moving around a lot in those ministry assignments that they have. There can come a point to where transition becomes, it's just what you do. And you learn to do it almost too well, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. Totally. I think I recognize this in myself after I got married and we had the choice to stay. Our jobs weren't shifting, and like it came up on year 3, I'm in the same house, the same job. And I was like, okay, shouldn't we be packing? It's time to go.
Okay. Yeah. That's exactly where I was going with that. Like, how do you stay grounded yet resilient in that process? Because, I've talked to a lot of, and myself included in certain seasons, feeling like, should I unpack my bags, completely here, or, should I just leave a suitcase out and ready to pack, kind of thing.
Right. You just it becomes part of who you are.
Yeah.
And that is just like every gift and every strength that we have. There's always those two sides, the shadow side and the benefit side. And so I feel like you're right. Those being aware of it is just really helpful. And then, just being aware, like, is this a place where is God inviting me to really unpack? Like, not just physically, but like, is there some unpacking I need to do emotionally or,
right.
Mentally and spiritually? Because I feel like what's easy to do is it's just easy to pack up our bags and like the baggage of that season and just sort of escape to the next season.
Right.
And eventually it catches up with you, right? I mean, eventually the bag's too heavy.
Eventually it's too heavy, and you don't grieve loss in a healthy way, for example, and you carry that into your next season, or you don't resolve issues maybe the way and bring closure to things like we should, and then we carry that into our next season. So I love the way that you're, in terms of your approach to transition. When I first asked you, you framed it mostly in a positive sense, but there are those two sides, and just an awareness, like you said, that this could be a default response that is not healthy. I need to lean into this other way of responding to the transition, or engaging in the transition, that's going to be healthy and maximize the growth opportunity in that.
Yeah. And what I love about how you talk about transition, Tim, is just really looking at it as opportunity for growth. And I think that's one of the blessings of having grown up with lots of change, is that, and I think for your listeners too, those families who have kids or who have been themselves kids who grew up just wired. I mean, this is just how life was. We generally could have a thought that change means new adventure. Change means opportunity. Change means like there's a positive spin on it. But I have to be honest that some of the harder transitions in my life, I didn't think that. Like, my thought was not, oh, there's a new opportunity here. It was very much in the space of, this really stinks. I can't believe this is happening. It's not a change I invited. It's not a change I was prepared for. And I think that's where, like shifting my thought or trying to key in on, okay, Heidi, we've been through this before, this, you'll get through it. And trying to frame that in a way that does focus on the opportunity or the growth. Good.
Yes. And framing it often involves a conversation, and coaching conversations are just a great way to unpack some of that, give language to what's you're processing internally, get some of that out and get some clarity as you process that. I know that was huge for me as I was navigating more of at least what I felt like was a forced transition. And I think sometimes we frame it a transition maybe, and there are real life forced transitions, right? Like pulled out transitions, but sometimes we'll frame a transition in that way, but we miss the fact that there's some intentional opportunity to be intentional around this that could really, really move us forward. And where is God in that? Right? Where's the invitation in that?
Absolutely. Well, and I think when you were going through that, or one of your more recent transitions, I know a lot of people can anchor themselves, anchor their families around like common values. And I think that's maybe what helped as I was younger, moving so much, like my microcosm, my microculture of my family. Like we had some anchor points, we had traditions, we had common values, and that's kind of what held us together and what helped us truly navigate being in a whole new place, all going through the process of reestablishing connections. But that, that alignment.
Yeah.
I know you help people do that in your coaching too.
Yeah. That alignment. Yeah. And that alignment goes with traditions represent, embedded in some of the traditions, family rituals, things like that are core values, right? So doing some of that core values work and reminding ourselves what are things I believe strongly in, or as a family, we believe strongly in, we want to move forward, non-negotiables, right? That we want to maintain some degree of resemblance, even though everything around us seems to be shifting and changing, right?
Right.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other part of surviving that hard transition, I feel, is like remembering the vision and remembering what God called you to. I'm just thinking of, having our 7th baby. And at the same time, one of my best friends was transitioning into full-time ministry with her husband and family overseas. And we had like similar conversations about how hard it was, mine was a baby, hers was a whole, culture and a whole nother set of responsibilities. And we both had to remind each other, kind of sing the song back to each other of like, well, what did God call us to? Like, we were both open to a mission, and we both got called into it. And then as we were into it, it was hard. And so just, I think, holding on to the purpose and the vision too. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah. Good. Love that. Yeah. And it's amazing how much you can have in common. Even though your transitions, for example, the example you just gave is, you were going through very different transitions, but when you have a conversation around that together, it's amazing how many similarities there are, parallels there are around some of the challenges that go around those transitions, even though they can look very different from person to person.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
What do you see as some of the common challenges?
The common ones, I think, are a little bit what we've talked about, maybe around the balance of staying grounded and yet adapting to change and being resilient, and knowing what might need to be, knowing what the season requires of me. So, and you've had to do a lot of this with all the change, so I think you know what I'm talking about. What does this season require of me? What am I being invited into? And those kinds of conversations are universal in transition. I think I can find common ground sitting with someone who's never lived cross-culturally, never moved, they've always lived in their one town all their lives, but they're still experiencing some transition, some shift. And I can be on the other side of the table, someone who's lived in 10 different countries and moved from place to place, and yet there are those common talking points and processing points. Yeah.
So true.
So that's what I love about transition. Everybody, and it's going through some kind of transition. It's always happening at some level, right?
Right. And I think that is just accepting that and acknowledging that is huge. For you, for a person, for a family, for an organization, for a team,
for sure,
just accepting that this is part of the normal reality. And it's really actually more part of our reality. That change is more normal than static. Like things are more in its constant, they're more changing than they are static. So just expecting that. And then I think as you were talking, I was thinking about, no matter what season of transition or what the circumstances, there's always this letting go, and there's always this grieving for that. And then there's always this shift of like, well, what might be possible, and then an acceptance and moving, toward that. And so sometimes just even thinking about those parts of the transition, for me, when I'm in it, it's kind of like being in a dark tunnel. Like if you came into a tunnel, the tunnel lasts for about this long. Well, we don't really know how long sometimes our changes and transitions last, but that there's an end, and that there's another set of track, another part of the ride, the other side of that.
Good. Yeah. Heidi, why don't you repeat those three points there? Because I think those are important. easy to kind of reflect on, remember takeaways for our listeners today? You mind just kind of repeating those and maybe even unpacking them just a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I can remember them, Kim, but there's always this letting go.
Yep.
And then there is, like, I guess if we boil it down to 3, and if you just imagine a timeline in front of you, and on the left side is the letting go. And then in the middle is kind of this grief part and the sadness associated, or frustration and anger associated with that, like a lot more negative emotion. And then to the right of that is this beginning, like this new seed or this beginning thought, like what might be possible now. And then on the way right at the end, there is this acceptance of like the new normal, or the owning of the new.
Good. Love that. Yeah. Those are some great, I think some great takeaways. Again, they're kind of a universal, way to process transition. Anybody going through a big shift or change or in a season of life that requires some grounding, maintaining what we can, it's a sense of groundedness and certainty in the midst of all the uncertainty. These are just some ways I think we, and kind of just a process we can kind of go through to navigate some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard you talk about, Tim, just the rock climber.
Yeah.
You want to share that analogy? Because I think it's beautiful when you talk about letting go, but anchoring or grounding.
Yeah. I think I was originally inspired by a picture I saw. I can't remember where I came across the photograph, but it was a guy on the side of a rock cliff who was a mountain climber, and he was scaling this cliff, and he had one hand, leverage himself. But pretty much the other 3 points of contact, his 2 feet and other hand, were looking and searching for those other holds or points of contact. And that just represents kind of, to me, what transition can feel like sometimes. What are some of those holds that we're grasping for, and how can, while I'm reaching for the next hold in transition, hold on, even if it's with one hand, right? Even if I'm dating, how can I hold on and maintain some sense of groundedness and security? So, and those can be simple things, like for us in transition, big transitions, and especially when we had kids at home, it was, family dinners around the table. Those were things we could maintain. Our quiet times with God, those things we tried to maintain. Like, those were just simple holds that were part of the routines and rhythms of our day that, they would get tweaked and adjusted because of all the, some of the chaos involved with change. But if you can just keep, and holds are also, I think, values, like what do I believe to be true in this season, and how am I going to hold on to that, and keep that to carry me through to the next season. So it's just a good, for me, just kind of it was a vivid reminder. I have to figure out what some of those holds are, right?
Yeah, I love that. I really love that image. I'd even just shared it with a friend this last week who's going through a big transition. And just a reminder too, to take it even a step further, Tim, because this is where my mind went, is like around when you ask what is necessary or what's asked of me in this season. So if you're on the face of a mountain climbing, let's just say that's your change in transition, you are going to pay attention to not falling off that mountain. I mean, and you have 4 points that you're really concerned about, but you're not going to care about all the things you cared about when you were at the bottom of the mountain at base camp. So I think it's important to remember that when we have a transition, it might feel like we are on the face of a mountain, and it's okay to make some boundaries around what you're going to care about, think about, invest in, because you don't want to fall off the side of this mountain. And so I think sometimes we don't give ourselves that space. Yeah. But it's really necessary. Yeah,
that's good. I hadn't thought about it that way, but another analogy that is kind of related to that, Heidi, is, the glass ball and rubber ball analogy, where, what are some things in this transition that are like glass balls? If I drop them, they're going to shatter and break, and I can't pick them up. I can't hand them off to anybody because they're not recoverable, but right. What are some of those other things, or whether they be rhythms, routines, activities that are more like the rubber ball that I can let go of? It'll bounce and it won't shatter. I can even pass it off, to somebody. The glass ball, if I'm passing off, I got to do a little more gently, maybe take a little bit more of a process with that. The rubber ball, it'll bounce back. But so, yeah, some of that, just discerning what those are, glass balls and rubber balls.
I love that. Yeah, that's so good.
Well, Heidi, it has been such a great conversation. I'm really happy we could do this today.
Me too.
I would love, and I would love for you to tell our listeners how they can connect and learn more about you. Maybe something you're working on, something you're creating, some resources you're offering, anything you'd like to share with our listeners so they can have a way to connect with you further.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably the best place to find out about what I'm doing or offering is at my website, HeidiLewerenz.com. And it's a doozy of a last name, so Tim will probably have to put it in the show notes. But I would love just to offer you this resource. It's called 3 Ways to Choose Calm Over Crazy. And it's a process I use for my own self with daily transitions or weekly transitions and even some really big transitions. Just focusing on 3 ways in the midst of transition, when you're in that chaos, how you can calm yourself, and it just has a few little exercises, prayerful exercises, bringing in the power of the Holy Spirit. And then, so I'd love to offer that to you. It's at my website, HeidiLewerenz.com/calm.
Great.
And then, I'd love to hear how and if that has helped you. And I just want to encourage you to reach out to Tim. He's such an amazing resource. And if you are on the side of a mountain, it's way easier to be hanging on a rock when you have a belay, like you have someone below. And that's what I think a coach really is. And Tim is just awesome at what he does.
Thanks, Heidi. I appreciate that. And the same, the feeling is mutual. And I just really am glad we could connect today. And I will spell out that website in my show notes. Heidi, it's HeidiLewerenz.com. But if you search and can't find it, just go to those show notes. You'll be able to just click on the link, get over to the website, take advantage of that free resource. And again, Heidi, thank you so much for being with me. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yes, I would love that. Thanks so much, Tim. It was a great conversation.
Where are you between the letting go and embracing the new? What are some of those holds or non-negotiables as you scale the transition mountain? Or as you consider the glass and rubber ball analogy, what will you choose to think and care about on your journey? What are some boundaries you might need to set for that to happen? So many great takeaways from this conversation with Heidi today. Do consider her a potential resource and a guide for any life and leadership challenge you and your team may be facing. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and if this has been helpful to you, would you mind taking a few moments to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever listening platform you use? That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, let's have a conversation. If you'd like to learn more about what I do as a coach and how I might be able to support you on your journey, reach out to me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com. Be blessed, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.